I think there's actually an addiction factor here. That people are so addicted to the 30 or more hormones of stress and 1,300 other chemicals of stress that a lot of people just don't want to stop. They are so hooked on being busy, producing more burnout and, ironically, a whole lot less productivity and fulfillment. Life seems to be getting busier and busier. The demands on you are growing like crazy from your family, from your friends, from your workplace, from your community, from everybody. It seems like they need things and energy, time from you, and there's nothing left for you. And it seems like this is just accelerating. Things are getting more chaotic. More and more people are dealing with overwork, and there's no time to stop and breathe. There's not even time to properly ask if the busyness is actually doing anything useful. It's like you're on this treadmill that just keeps going and going, and everyone's doing it anyway, so you just keep going. And is it actually getting you anywhere? I think there's actually an addiction factor here. That people are so addicted to the 30 or more hormones of stress and 1,300 other chemicals of stress that a lot of people just don't want to stop. They are so hooked on being busy, producing more burnout and, ironically, a whole lot less productivity and fulfillment in life. Now, you may be strong, you may be resilient, you've handled a lot, you're there for everybody else, but all of this is building up for so many people. And we need to really, at some point, stop and say, do we need to do this? But we don't know how to break free. How do you get out of that craziness long enough to see if it or all of it is even necessary? SOULgineering is about stopping, being present, being clear about the why of what you're doing, and crafting a strategy, whether it's for yourself, for your organization, that lets you create a healthy and balanced life. For you personally, it's about starting from what I call the core, your inner sense of purpose, your unique gift, your unique sense of self or identity, and then sculpting your life and leadership from there. For organizations, it's about engaging all of your people and all of the key players to clearly define your core shared purpose in plain English, not mission speak and vision speak, and innovating a simple breakthrough strategy and a healthy culture that nourishes your people and help your people, and they buy in because they co-created it. This is not rocket science, folks. I used to be a rocket scientist. I can say that. You can trust me when I say that. It's about building an organization and life that nourishes you, aligns you and your people with all of your passions and strengths to produce focus, meaning, and consistently outstanding results. So, there's a lot of people out there with different systems. What sets SOULgineering apart? That's what I want to tell you about here, where it came from, that there are proven principles, because I started out as a scientist. I very much test everything. When we launched our program on resilience for organizations, I charted several programs before they took the program and after, and a lot of people do that. But I also tracked on a very thorough survey 1 month later, 6 months later, to prove that the results were lasting, was even able to show that organizations were able to pay for the program within 6 months with reduced absenteeism. So I'm very much about the science in this. And does it work? Now, does the science mean absolutely how and why it works? No. And I'll tell you why. Okay. So what are the roots of this? Well, I've spent my whole life understanding the science of success, understanding what works in business. And so I've studied a lot of things you may have looked at, a lot of the elements you may have studied as well, things like the law of attraction and so on. But the reality is that doesn't work consistently for everybody. So one thing I looked into was, why does it not work consistently? Why does it work when it does? Why does it not work when it doesn't? So I've studied all of that. As I mentioned, I started out as a scientist. I was a nuclear physicist. So it's really about, for me, proving that things can happen. Now, the interesting thing is, because I worked in nuclear physics and quantum physics, it's very different from other sciences. Like, when you mention this, people think of high school physics and often their brains explode with all the mathematics. And it seems so definite, so absolute, so specific and detailed that this is the way that it works. And this is why, and you can spell out every little step. That's what's called classical physics. Quantum physics is completely different. One of the core elements of quantum physics is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, which says you cannot know everything. The more you know one thing, the less you know another. In terms of particles, the more you know exactly where a particle is, the less you know how fast it's going. You cannot know both. So this law of uncertainty is inherent in it. And also it's probability. Nothing is absolute. It's all about probability. So it's a very different level of science when you get to that level. The other thing that being a physicist taught me is how to work with complex systems, with complexity. And there's nothing more complex, is there, than people and organizations, groups of people. What I discovered as a physicist is that when you have complex systems, they interact with each other, they impact with each other, they do all of these things. You cannot control it all. What you have to identify in a complex system is there are very specific little leverage points where you put a little pressure here, little pressure there, and the whole system shifts and transforms. And what happened was I developed the ability to find those leverage points as a physicist. And when I, through my own little journey, discovered that my passion is not eating radiation, but it's working with people, I had to grow out of my geekiness for that. And not through conscious thought, the universe tends to take you where you need, but I wound up in my first career very quickly drafted into a team that reinvented the whole organization across the country. And I very quickly discovered that same lens that I have that let me find the leverage points in my experiments in physics also let me identify what they were in organizations with people, when I'm coaching people, when I'm working with systems of people. And if you put a little bit of pressure in, everything else shifts around. What most people do when they're dealing with complexity is they make it complicated and they analyze it to death and try to find all of the factors that directly impact and so on. And the gift I had was realizing that you can't know everything, but you can influence probability. And what I was doing was applying those leverage points to influence probability and what could happen. And that's how I generated success. That's the roots of all the work I do in my corporate change work, culture change, strategic planning. It's about leveraging those points. And when I do coaching one-on-one, or I work with people on my discovery retreat to connect with that core and then resculpt your life around that, it is all about those leverage points, helping them discover those leverage points and use them to be able to shift and transmute and transform their lives. So let me give you an idea of how this works, or maybe this whole, this is not meant to be complicated, but I'll give you how I first started discovering it. When I was doing my research in physics, we were working with a particle accelerator, a cyclotron. For anyone who knows it, it was 35 to 50 MeV protons that we were working with. And what would happen is our lab was 7 meters underground. And we had building up in the parking lot that would generate ions that shoot it down in the particle accelerator that would then start to flip them around, and the protons would get accelerated, and then shoot down one of many beam lines where the experiments were. And the ideal was to have maximum beam on target so you could do the best you could with your experiment. Now, what happened is every once in a while we had to do maintenance on the particle accelerator, take it apart, put it back together. I absolutely hated it because I was a skinny runt back then, 110, 120 pounds. And guess who was the tiny guy that could get up into those trays that held the wires and sort all that out? It was horrible. But anyway, we would take this particle accelerator out, put it back together. So all the settings that were calibrated for so long, so beautifully, were ruined. And we brought in a computer to optimize the beam so that it would be, as much beam on target as possible again. Now, something that happens, this machine was so expensive that if you're running an experiment, you run 24 hours a day. And if you are running the experiment, guess who does the overnight shift? You do. And so what happened was, once I had an experiment running right after the maintenance, and we were back on board, the computer had optimized the beam on target, and I had a whole panel in front of me of dials that controlled these magnets. And what happened was the particle beam shot down this beam, this tube, and just like a beam of light, it would naturally spread apart. But what we focused it just like a beam of light, except instead of using lenses, glass lenses, we used magnets to focus it. Now, it was a lot more complicated when you do it. It's not just stick a lens in and it narrows the beam, blah, blah, blah. When you're working with particles, what happens is you've got, pardon me for getting a little mathy here, but the beam line where the beam's shooting down is what we call the Z-axis, and the vertical is the Y, the horizontal is the X. And if you focus the beam in the X-axis, it actually defocuses it in the Y. So you have to have a series of magnets that defocus on all these different planes to actually make it focus together in all levels, so that you don't wind up with a big slit going one way or the other of particles. And you want a point that's very intense. So we had all of these magnets along the beam line, and I had these dials in front of me. And what I started doing was I started working with those dials, adjusting the magnets. And at first, it took me a whole 8-hour shift. But then I started doing it in 3-4 hours, and then in an hour, and then in a few minutes, where I could get 3 to 4 times the beam on target at the end that the computer had optimized it for. Now, you cannot do this thinking it. You see, this is where physics, quantum physics, nuclear physics is totally different from the physics that blew up your brains from high school. We're not dealing with 3-dimensional stuff. We deal with infinite dimensional math, fractional dimensional math. You cannot think it. What I realized I didn't know I was doing it at the time, but what I realized that I did was that I felt the whole beam line sensed it in my head. I didn't think it, I could feel it. You can't feel infinite dimensions. You can't think infinite dimensions. You can only feel it. You can sense it. And I could sense how the magnets were interacting with each other. It's incredibly complex mathematics. If you ever worked it out, back then our computers could never have worked it out. So they just weren't advanced enough. But somehow in my head, I sensed the whole beam line, and I was able to manipulate it. I felt how those interactions happen, one magnet to another down the line, to be able to optimize the beam on target. So that was my objective. That's how I did it, through understanding the complexity and finding those pressure points, and not thinking it, not analyzing it, but sensing what was the pressure point to apply and how to. At the same time that I did this, I was DJing at nightclubs. I was DJing at the top dance club in town. And my job was 400 or 500 people in the club, was to constantly keep people churning through the dance floor, having a great time, feeling great, moving through so that they would also go to the bar, buy drinks, buy food and all that, so that the bar would make money, and then build it up to a crescendo at the end of the night so everyone feels amazing and wants to come back. What I realized that I was doing was, I'm an empath, and I could sense the emotions of the crowd. I could sense all of the emotions of 500 people in the nightclub. And what I did was, I realized that just as with the cyclotron, with the particle accelerator, by changing the dials for the magnets, for the electromagnets, by what song I mixed into what song at what point, by changing the pitch by a few tenths of a percent, I could sculpt those emotions to be able to build people up, off, move them out. And I think in my decade or so DJing, I think I cleared the dance floor 3 times ever. And those were early on in my career. And it was about sculpting the emotions through the night. So instead of focusing the beam, I was sculpting emotions at the time. And also a third piece was, I was at the same time running the backbone of a children's telethon, which was 2,000 volunteers over 3 days and nights. I was running the administration office, and incredibly complex, that when a crisis happened and a volunteer went this way, you had to move it and and find it back up and whatever. You couldn't think it. But I found I was using that same understanding of complexity, and in my head, I sensed the whole. And whenever there was a shift here, I would my intuition said, I've got to change this. I've got to move this person there. And I was able to manage that. So it's about a lifetime of practice of building on that awareness of, you cannot control anything, but you have to sense what you're going for and identify what is it that influences the outcome. And that's what SOULgineering is. It is about the processes, the principles, the simple disciplines that you can use to bring more heart, more soul into your life, into all of your work. So how can you find those simple things to focus on that actually let you SOULgineer the life you want, that let you break out of the cesspool of suck to SOULgineer the life, the work, everything that you want? And this is an ongoing journey. I've worked with this for all of my adult life, learned, shifted, transformed, grown. It continues to. I'm not going to pretend I know all the answers. I'm still learning. But I've got one heck of a repository of tools, simple tools that can allow you to start to step more fully into the life that you want, to break out of that craziness, that busyness, break out of the cesspool of suck, and SOULgineer the life that you really want. And that's what this podcast is about. I'm going to be bringing you principles that I practice, that I've learned. I'm also going to be interviewing people that are applying these leverage points in amazing ways to help you find those tiny little pressure points that shift, transform everything in your life. So let me share one with you right now.
Check it out, check it out. Are you ready for this?
One of the biggest challenges that people have, it is the biggest destroyer of resilience. It is, I believe, the one thing that torpedoes success more than anything else. Whenever I give a talk, virtually every one of the hands in the room goes up of people saying they regularly have trouble sleeping at night because their head just won't shut up. of that during the day, they are beating themselves up in their head for things that they messed up, or they're stressing over things that have to come. It is that internal dialogue, that monkey mind, that head chatter that will not shut up. And to be blunt, I have not found one useful application of that. Well, let me just say, okay, when you're grocery shopping and you have to compare the contents of one thing over another, yeah, okay, that's a useful application. Other than that, I found zero use for that head chatter, for that monkey mind. Some people even think that's who they are. It is not who you are. Okay? It is just something that is there that you have let run your life. You've let yourself run because you didn't know how to turn it on. Now, how useful would it be if I could show you how to shut that off like that in a snap? Would that be helpful to you? One of the Jedi mind tricks that I've developed is something that absolutely lets you do that. Will it work instantaneously? No. But if you take 1 week, that's all you need to take, and about 5 minutes a day, scattered through the day, so 30 seconds here, 30 seconds there, a few minutes here. I'm not talking about massive workload. You can build a habit that within a week, you will be able to shut that head chatter off whenever you want, so that you can roll over, go to sleep without that keeping you up, so that you can stop beating yourself up, and instead of beating yourself up over what you messed out, figure out how to find a way to go forward. Instead of stressing over something that's coming up, make sure that you're prepared. Rehearse what you need to do. Would that be useful to you? So if it would, I have a free e-course for you. All you have to do is go to silenceselftalk.com and sign up. It's all there free for you, all the resources, how to do this, the discipline, what you need to do for a week or two to build the habit so that you can just shut that voice off whenever you want. You can be free and highly, highly productive. So are you going to commit to that one action? All it takes is a simple action, and this is one of the most powerful leverage points there is. Test it out, try it out, and let me know how it works. If this is useful to you, I'd really appreciate if you can do a review and rate this where you are. And if you know people who could use this material, who could use really practical, simple techniques to really make this work, to transform and transmute their lives, please share this information with them. I'd love it if you shared it on socials as well. Really appreciate it, and we will see you next episode.
I got the energy, it's all I need to